Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode 4 of the Black Male Studies Sessions. My name is Torraine Walker. This is a series of discussions and roundtables focused on addressing the issues affecting Black men and boys. This series is sponsored by the African American Men's Historical Society. The AMHIS is a Black American men's intellectual society focused on the preservation, history, and empowerment of Black men. Go to amhis.org to learn more and visit their Substack at amhis.substack.com. Tonight's conversation is dedicated to the revolutionary spirit of Assata Shakur, the freedom fighter who passed away on September 25th of this year in Havana, Cuba. The passing of Assata, in my opinion, signals the passing of a lot of revolutionary spirit that used to be very prevalent in Black America. And I wanted to get into a conversation about where that revolutionary spirit lies, where it comes from, and also how it was dismantled and destroyed. Assata's escape was organized and carried out by her comrades in the Black Liberation Army. And the subject of tonight's discussion is the concept of gender genocide. According to Article 2 of the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, the definition of genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. Number 1, killing members of said group. Number 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of that group. 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And 5, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Around the world in recent history, we've seen these measures enacted on Jews, Roma, and Slavs in Nazi Germany, on Armenians by the Ottoman Empire near the end of World War I, and currently by the State of Israel and Palestinians during the current war in Gaza. In the United States, we've seen these measures inflicted on Native Americans, and I propose that the same conditions are right and inflicted on Black Americans, Black American men in particular, and that falls within the same category that the UN laid out. The systematic disenfranchisement, psychological abuse, and physical destruction of Black males since our arrival in the United States fits the criteria of genocide as practiced by oppressive regimes throughout modern history. And I wanted to unpack that issue and get the thoughts of somebody who's done work in this field, basically in Black male studies. Joining me again tonight is Professor Tommy J. Curry, Ph.D., MPH, Personal Chair of Africana Philosophy and Black Male Studies, Department of Philosophy, the University of Edinburgh School of Philosophy, Psychology and Language Sciences, the editor of Black Male Studies, a series exploring the paradoxes of racially subjugated males, editor of Decolonial Philosophy and Philosophy Compass, and the author of The Man Not, Race, Class, Genre, and the Dilemmas of Black Manhood, winner of the 2018 American Book Award. Dr. Curry, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
I'm good, and I appreciate you being up this late because I know it's real late in Edinburgh, and I know you had a lot of stuff going on. So thank you again for taking time out of your schedule to have this conversation.
Brother, it's an absolute pleasure.
All right, well, let's get into it. Question of the night: are Black American men and boys victims of genocidal practices in the United States?
I mean, the obvious answer to that question is yes. Um, Today, we're being confronted with increasingly racialized and misandric language that's meant to both condemn and criminalize Black men and boys. These adversarial and warlike strategies that have been imposed by Trump uh, have sought to manage Black and even to a certain extent Latino populations, alien male populations in major cities throughout the United States. Now, most recently, Trump has said that he's going to send the National Guard to New Orleans. And this, of course, means that a place like New Orleans, which has a Black population, roughly of 54%, and another place in Louisiana, my home state, like Baton Rouge, that has a Black population of 51%. We see that he's targeting cities and centers that have been historically linked to the oppression of black people and especially the lynching and persecution of black males. Now we have to think about this in context, right? Trump just came from Chicago. He came from Washington, D.C. and a recent campaign in Baltimore. And throughout all of these campaigns, there's been a deliberate depiction of black men as prone to criminality, dangerous to social safety, and in his mind, responsible for the majority of violent crime in America. Now, remember what he said in Chicago, right? That it was actually black women, right? Beautiful black women that were asking him to come. So Trump claimed that because he's trying to make the world safe, that his project, his program, his militarization of black majority cities becomes understandable because he's trying to save black women from dangerous black men. Now, we of course have black women push back on this, right? Like Representative Kelly, she pushed back saying this is not what black women want. But what's important about this is how the remarks of someone like Trump, the idea of killing or incarcerating dangerous black men still holds a very peculiar and powerful political currency in the United States. We saw the same strategies 2 decades ago when we were dealing with the myth of the superpredator, right? John Dewey making the same claim that you're going to have all these young black men who are born criminals that are fundamentally going to destroy the moral and social fabric of America. It's the same language that happened in the 1960s when black men were embracing the civil rights movement and black nationalism, saying that in order for black people to become free, we couldn't do it through reform. Black men were criminalized. You have psychologists saying that black men suffer from protest psychosis, that they suffer from a delusion and a break for reality. All of these strategies and history of demonizations around black males is still accumulated and active in our present day. So think about it this way. Right now, we have ongoing political discussions. And like think about all the pundits that are on social media, that are still on liberal channels, etc., talking about Trump's policies, talking about the increased militarization of American society generally, both in terms of deportation and the demonization of black men. But none of them have talked about the relationship between the masculine threat of alien males, non-white males, to white society and how that demonization of these groups of men is fueling societal legitimacy and popular support for Trump's methods. In our last session, I talked briefly about the work of Amy Randall, right? Where she said that, look, if there's a sex specific slaughter or what she called a gender specific killing of racial or ethnic males, right, of racial or ethnic male civilians, that it's a warning sign. Because when you kill those black men, if you kill those brown men or Jewish men, whatever the case may be, that is pointing to a more generalizable pattern and it is foretelling destruction and mass murder of the whole group. Now, this is how genocide scholars understand the precursors to the demonization and the overall oppression, if not elimination, of other groups. But in America, we stood by for over a decade watching black men, black American men, be slaughtered and on public news, on body cams, etc., and did nothing. So the black American population had a front row seat to the very precursor that someone like Amy Randall says indicates the overall oppression of your group. And instead of us saying, why is it that young black males are being systematically eliminated? We took a different approach. We said, hands up, don't shoot. We said, let's focus on black women and other sexual minorities purely on the basis of identity and not on the basis of what the demographic patterns of war and genocide teaches. Now think about this. So even when we have publicly available databases, right, like the Washington Post Fatal Force database, which tracks police shootings from 2015 to 2024 or 25. From that time period, there's been over 2,494 Black Americans shot by police. That's 2,494. And of those 2,494 Black Americans shot, 2,406 were Black men. So for over the last decade, 96.5% of the Black people killed in the United States by police have been Black males. And we didn't think that that indicates to us anything about the upcoming fascism, right, as the white liberals like to call it now, of America. We watched a whole population of Black men start and didn't think it told us anything about what was coming for our people, because our people thought they were separate from these problematic, poor Black men. And this tells us something about what we think of as the revolutionary moment or the revolutionary consciousness. Today, Black people separate themselves on any number of different identities and social positions. It could be sexual orientation. It could be sex or gender. It could be education. But under this administration, we've gotten a wake up call because the racism that we had largely dismissed and displaced upon poor working class Black people, specifically Black males, has now become the kind of haunting inspector that's condemning all Black people in the United States. Civil rights are being rolled back. Gerrymandering is now being allowed. That means that our voting powers decrease. The appreciation of Black oppression is practically for naught. The real oppressed minority, according to Trump, are Jews. So in a world without recognition, where you don't have white liberals safeguarding the recognition of Black rights, and in many ways have put up no fight or resistance whatsoever against Trump's policies, how do we understand revolutionary resistance in this moment? You see, it was foreshadowed. Black males were the canary in the coal mine, but we ignored the signs. We chose identity politics and coalitional logics. And the effect of that is to put us a decade later, after the reign of Obama, in a political situation where we don't have any answers and where we refuse to pay attention to the ways that masculine threats and the masculinization of the Black race as a danger has been used as a political currency to get white people or to convince more white people than before to support the ongoing slaughter and oppression of our people. That's not just ignorance. It's not enough to say Black people didn't know. This is an at-large program that has ripped the teeth out of how we understand racism and what we understand America to actually be. And we need a course correction because no amount of us discussing the issue, no amount of us voting, no amount of us appealing to the sensibilities of the American white population is going to change the repetitive patterns of war, of societal control, of genocide, etc., that's being imposed on Black people in this moment.
Most genocide historians usually draw a line from dehumanization to the mass grave. In the public mind, most people think of genocide as the images that we've seen in either recent history or distant history. Bodies on the street, mass graves, that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit about some of the soft patterns and force that lead to genocide, dehumanization, miseducation, and those sort of things, the way that leads up
Hmm.
into the demonization that leads to death?
No, absolutely, absolutely. That's a great question. I mean, listen, I think we need to be very specific about what dehumanization is and how it operates. Okay. There's a tendency, I think, within the American Academy and even in the punditry of Black political commentator that thinks of dehumanization as another form of marginalization. And that's not necessarily true. To be dehumanized means that you are extricated, that you are outside of the moral community of a particular society. It is often associated with a psychological precursor uh, to place groups of biological human beings into categories of the non-human. This is why within genocides, when you look at certain forms of propaganda, You see the target group, the oppressed group, represented as reptiles and vermin, pests, spreading disease and pestilence within a society. And dehumanization operates as a kind of psychological catalyst for the elimination of that group because it is suggesting that the existence of one group is disadvantageous to another. So the rhetoric that we see gaining lots of popular acceptance and currency. And when I say this, I want to be clear. There was a belief following the civil rights movement that the idea that black people were fundamentally a threat to whites became a marginal position, right? Even during the time of Obama, those positions were thought to be fringe positions of the alt-right or the Tea Party. And what we now see is those positions becoming a moderate political stance, that it is now part of the everyday discussion and discourse of the American populace. The question of whether or not black people are criminal, the question of whether or not black people are a fundamental danger, not only to white people's physical safety, but to their cultural and mental security within the nation, right? So then when you put that in context of what genocide and genocidal ideation means, you can see that there's a growing sensibility within the United States that black people are in fact disadvantageous to the growth and rule of the white population. That's immensely problematic for how we've traditionally thought about racism in the United States. Under intersectional and post civil rights ideology, we have largely understood racism as a mechanism of discrimination. Said differently, we have traditionally, for the last 40 years, I don't want to say traditionally, but for the last 30 or 40 years, we have thought about racism as a form of discrimination that is comparable to things like sexism, ageism, disability, etc. So under this kind of intersectional rubric, right, drawing from Title VII jurisprudence, we thought about these as obstacles to recognition or obstacles to equality within the workforce or the employment or education or these other sectors. Dehumanization is a completely different ballgame. It's not simply about the discrimination or the prevention. It's not simply an obstacle to equality. It is removing groups of people from the category of the human altogether, such that they would never qualify for the idea of equality. And because we've lost a very clear understanding of that, that's why we're now listening to liberals say, oh, America's becoming fascist. And we're joining that fascist bandwagon and claim. But we misunderstood that the very notions of black people being disposable, shot in the streets, having their body like Mike Brown, lay there without any kind of honorific apology or respect, those were all examples of dehumanization. So because we watered down racism from this structural, historical, dehumanizing force that viewed black people being in a lower plane of civilization or evolution than the white race and tried to be part of American society, we mistakenly thought of ourselves as human beings that had permanent rights that couldn't be taken away. And as Derek Bell has taught us, as Huey P. Newton has taught us, as Assata has taught us, in a society that's built on anti-black racism, you're only one emotion away from losing all of your rights. As I said before, in less than a year, Trump has destroyed 30 years of black civil rights gains. Think about how precarious of a situation that is. That as black people, we have built political division. We have built identities and professions around professing that the United States is a democratic society that offers us hope and equality. And in less than a year, one president, one political party was able to destroy all the effort, all the lives, all the careers of black people that base their whole identity on that false premise that America would treat black people as equal. So dehumanization, right? And we really need to start talking more in these terms. Dehumanization is integral to how racism has been practiced throughout the West since the 20th century, the birth of the 20th century. And what's most important about that is that if we recognize that relationship between racism and dehumanization, we wouldn't be talking about fascism right now, because we would have recognized that when all these black men were being killed for the last decade, this was telling us where we were. Black people have always lived under fascist regimes. Police, military, criminalization, the dissolution and suspension of rights, be it through voting or through due process, has always been a part of the Black American experience and how we live our daily lives. But what we have done is we've created classes of black people who get to touch, to slightly glaze over the lives of whites so that they don't experience an authoritarian regime because of their class position. And people said, no, look, that's the example, that's the evidence, that's the proof that black people no longer live in these depraved, dehumanized states. We've mistaken the small minority of black, educated, and middle class aspirant representatives as the actual condition of black people. And now that Trump has thrown us back into all the same group and category, we don't have any answers. We don't have a true understanding of dehumanization. We have not been developing theories of genocide given the condition of poverty, incarceration, extermination, and police violence over the last several decades. We've pushed reformism. And that's an indication not only of our ideological blindness, but our loss of revolution and structural consciousness. It's not an issue of the politics, it's an issue of the analysis. And we have not done a good job continuing the analysis that shows that dehumanization is part and parcel of the black experience in the United States. Instead, we've pushed this notion of a hope for integration and social mobility.
You mentioned earlier the numbers and the disparity in numbers when it comes to black men killed by police and black women killed by
Hmm.
police. Can you repeat those
Yes,
numbers again?
yes. Yes, those were just the numbers from the Fatal Force database by the Washington Post. It said from 2015 to 2024, there's been roughly 2,494 black people killed shot by cops, right? Shot by cops because it doesn't take all killings into account. And of that 2,494, 2,406 were black males. So that means that roughly over the last decade, only 88 women have been shot. Black women have been shot by cops. And I think that disparity is important because it again gives a kind of a concrete and empirical proof of what Black male studies scholars have been talking about for the last decade, which is there is the reality of a racialized male target, that racism, specifically lethal violence, seems to gravitate and become energized by the black male target. They want to eliminate them. They see an honor in killing black males. But we haven't dealt with this disparity as a group. We've continued to try to hide the numbers, right? And I think we've seen this, just ready proof of this during BLM. And we haven't had any serious endeavor outside of black male studies to explain the targeting of black men and boys by police in carceral systems as a function of a larger program of dehumanization and genocide. So we've been utilizing the wrong ideas. We've been utilizing ideology instead of analytics and social analysis to come up with answers about a situation that we thought would never happen, right? Black liberals simply did not believe that Trump would win again and that Trump would pursue this kind of Project 2025. You can't make me believe that they thought that that was a possibility, because if they did, they should have had a much stronger candidate under the first 4 years, under Biden's 4 year administration. They should have been planning for that. But based on the hopes and the dictates, or the mandates, I should say, of a white liberal populace, black people ignored that. They were willing to sacrifice poor working class black men and boys for the elevation and suspension of a black bourgeoisie. And this is what I talk about in chapter 3 of The Man Not. We're not just dealing with,
I want to
we're
ask this
not just,
because I see some parallels
yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah.
Um, some of the same things that are happening in the Black American community and have been happening, as you mentioned earlier, for decades, have a lot of historical parallels. Huey
Hmm.
Newton famously referred to Black Americans as almost an eternal colony in the United States, and you've made mention of
Yes.
that before in previous talks that we've had. And if you
Hmm.
look at the history of the interactions between Black men and the state, as a rule, usually police officers are often the first initial physical point of contact between Black American men. And
Hmm.
looking at the increased militarization of American policing, and also the fact that a lot of police officers that are moving into the society are coming out of the military and also coming out of
Yes.
not just the military, but also combat experience. Do you think the increased militarism of American policing indicates a genocidal mind state driving the system when it comes to black males?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But there was a book by the scholar A.J. William Myers, right?
Dr. Curry, you're breaking up a
And
little bit.
he,
Sounds like you're in this matrix a little bit.
I'm sorry about that. Is this better? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir. We can hear you now.
Excellent, excellent. Uh, there was a book that I used to teach in my
You're
anti-colonialism
going out
class.
again. I think I don't know if there's some tech difficulties going on, but you sound like you're a little bit muffled. If everybody else can hear Dr. Curry,
Okay.
put up a 100 just to be sure it's not something on my end.
Am I coming through any better?
Can you say something again, Dr. Curry?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me? All right. Looks like everyone else can hear me. Yes. Excellent, excellent.
Okay, 1 second.
Uh, sure.
1 second, folks. We may have a little bit of technical difficulties. One moment.
Okay.
Okay, mic check, mic check. Um,
Yes.
all right, Dr. Curry, if you can hear me, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. I think everyone else can hear me. It may be on your end. Uh, I think you're right. I think there is a genocidal mindset driving how Black Americans are increasingly being engaged in the United States. But I want to say something about what I think causes that rise. There has always been a need to control the Black population, both Black men and Black women. Now, when we talk about, for example, forced sterilization of Black women, what we often forget is the deliberate attempts by the architects of this criminalization to prevent Black women from having more Black boys, more Black males. And what's happened is that we've not allowed ourselves to understand how populations, and this is an important point, how populations are managed, controlled, and demonized within a certain geography. Internal colonization theory was popular during the 60s and 70s because it was talking about how an internal colony, how a Black population was being managed, controlled, and exploited for its labor and political presence by whites. And what we've done now is we've pretended, and it's so important to emphasize this. We have now pretended that the examples of death and condemnation that have been imposed largely on poor Black folk somehow does not affect the middle and upper class Black people. So we've then defined equality on this kind of upper strata of Black people, as if the way the white public talks about the poor Black people won't affect the upper and middle classes. And what's happened now under Trump is all of that racial animus, right? That's been boiling and settling and just not popular to say, but always there. Because this is what we're seeing is the real America. That racial animus has now found expression and public legitimacy. So this is not new. And I think the mistake that's being had in some of the commentary that I've seen on CNN is that, and MSNBC, is that they pretend that this is somehow being fueled by Trump. Trump is the expression of a white society recalibrating itself against what it takes to be internal and foreign threats based on race. So when Du Bois was saying race is the biggest problem of the 20th century, right? We thought that had passed because of the civil rights movement. Somehow Black people, and I don't know how, because I wasn't born yet, but for some reason, Black people believed that desegregation somehow meant a new world. And what's been shown to us over and over and over again is that there are white people, everyday white people in America, who are willing to participate, give up their 9 to 5 jobs to become ICE agents, to become deputized in the name of white supremacy, to support and join the National Guard or other militarized state apparatuses or agencies to control black and brown populations. And the only answer we've had to this question, to this enduring pattern and phenomena for black people is to fight each other. We're arguing with each other about who gets more recognition for being killed. That was the primary mechanism of Black Lives Matter. To discuss, well, we know that 90 some percent, 96, 97% of the black people killed are black men, but they're getting too much attention. We're not focused on why they're killing us. And it's this logic, right? These are not debates of ideology. This is debates of applicability. Why is it that black political theory? Why is it that black punditry? Why is it that black commentary have not been able to demonstrate in real time how their accounts of the world fit into what black people are experiencing? So by now we have a white population. We have college educated white people who are in schools, white men and white women who fundamentally believe that black people are more dangerous, more prone to criminality, and that the only way the white race is going to survive is if they get them under control. And what's our answer to that? What is the black intellectuals? What is the black communities? What is the black activists answer to that? Because now they don't care if you call them racist. They're about protecting their racial self-interest. You see that with the memorialization of Charlie Kirk's death. You see how they forced America. They first forced all Americans, all black people, to respect that racist martyr. So you want to talk about people's attitudes? You want to talk about differences of political opinion? What does it mean when you tell an oppressed people that they have to respect and mourn their oppressor? And that if they do not, their livelihoods will not only be destroyed, but it will be completely eliminated. That there any possibility for them to work in public institutions or state institutions will be denied. You see, this is not about our simple identity as black people. This is about how white people want to rule a world and the place they're going to dictate and mandate for black people within it. And those are two fundamentally different things. Because if you're the kind of person that thinks that the world's going to respond to your disadvantage and then recognize you and you deliver on its promises of equality, you're sorely mistaken. Because it's not just this moment. It's not just that we're failing in this moment. The issue is that it's always a possibility that at any point in time, white Americans could decide to take away all black people's rights. And we've seen that with Trump. We see that with the Supreme Court he's appointed. That at any point, white America could decide black people no longer have the rights they claimed were promised to them. And year after year, generation after generation, century after century, here we are yet again trying to explain the thing that was explained to us almost 50 years ago, right? If we don't start understanding the demographic problem, the ways that populations interact, the ways that white majority populations manage minority racialized populations, then we're going to continue to miss the picture. And right now, we've been caught with our pants down because we don't have an answer to it. Intersectionality doesn't work. We don't have coalitions. Feminism doesn't work because white women are worried about themselves, not us. Black progressivism doesn't work because there's nobody to be progressive with. So in a world where militaries, police, ICE agents, etc., are now controlling and managing populations in front of our face, and it's being called democracy, what do? Do we just endure and hope for a better world? Or do we start changing the way that we think? Do we start building different relationships with other oppressed groups around the world? These are the questions that we have to answer. right? It's not going to be found by trying to appeal to the decadent ideas of yesteryear. And until we start getting back to the consciousness of what it means for a society to manage and dehumanize people, we're still going to be trying to fight in that old anti-discrimination civil rights language of recognition, pleading for attention, and joining with our oppressors. That day is over, right? The institutions, the power, the violence, the death of black people, at some point it has to be enough. And the older I get, the more exhausted I get, not just by white people, because you can read history and you know what they're going to do. I get exhausted by black people. I get exhausted by having to have arguments about a reality that doesn't exist. It's one thing to have an argument about how do we solve a problem. We need multiple perspectives. We need to have great, deep disagreements about solutions to the problems. But to argue whether or not the problem exists or if this is the right reality, that's tiring. We've lost far too many black people, both black men and black women. We've lost too many black communities. We've lost too many black children to be surprised that for the second time, a white majority nation voted for a white supremacist that wants the white race to win at all costs. We can't keep being surprised that our oppressor is oppressing us. And that's exactly the situation that we continue to find ourselves in year after year.
I want to go into something that you said earlier because, like I said before, there's definitely historical precedents to go along with this. And when it comes to black people in America, the precedent that makes more sense to me, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is the state of society in Germany during the Weimar Republic. Um, if you look at the history of Germany after World War One, they had been defeated. The country itself had no real sense of itself because its self-image as the most dominant military on the planet was destroyed, and they started casting around for scapegoats. But before they did that, Germany went from being an empire in 1918 to becoming a republic almost overnight. There were revolutions in the streets. There were different political factions literally having street battles. There were the Reichswehr, there were the not the Reichswehr, but the Free Corps, which were the far right fighting the German
Mm-hmm.
communists. And also at the time, and in the midst of all that was going on, you had this decadent culture. Um, some people might remember this from, if you haven't seen it, the movie Cabaret, even though it was based on the books of Christopher Isherwood, talks about that, how there was like a lot of, let's just say, alternative lifestyles going on in Germany at that time, to the point where it was so freewheeling that it created a reaction that the far
Mm-hmm.
right could push back against, and in the form of, first with the far right independent militaries coming in, basically private militaries, and then eventually with Hitler. But while
Yeah,
that
with
was going
Nazis, yeah.
on, yes, but while that was going on, there was all this tension and turmoil going on within the Weimar Republic, because the Weimar Republic government was basically sort of like a loose confederation of different political groups that could not get together. They would fight with each other, and they would not even try to create a strong coalition government that could really govern the country. Coupled
Mm-hmm.
with economic chaos that happened during the Depression, was left the door open for Adolf Hitler. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because what happened in Germany was that people who may have had small amounts of anti-Semitism that never acted on it, the minute that Germany became under the control of the Third Reich and under Nazi Germany, people who were neighbors with each other immediately began to turn on each other. Germans
Yes.
who considered themselves ethnic Germans began to turn on their Jewish neighbors who they'd known for decades.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that's amazing about that, if you listen to histories and um, historical documents from that time when people give their testimony, a lot of people who were Jewish wanted to pretend like what was happening did not happen, or they thought it was some
Yes.
sort of like temporary psychosis that the country would wake up from, and they would laugh Hitler out of office. And obviously, we know history proves that that didn't happen. And I feel
Uh-huh.
like some of those same things are happening in some of the circles you mentioned, the black academic circles, a lot of the black upper class circles, and some of the black middle class circles. They're literally, sometimes the way they speak, they act like Trump is something that came out of a burning hole in the ground and brought all this misery and hatred with him and everything, without talking about the fact that what we're seeing right now parallels what happened in Germany. What's happening with
Yeah.
this administration is the culmination of things that have been brewing for decades, at least since the 1980s in America. Can you speak on that a little bit about that
No,
delusion that a
listen,
lot of people who have?
look, I mean, I completely agree with you, right? I completely agree with you. And this is why I said dehumanization is such a powerful psychological catalyst for both creating in and out groups, but for demonizing and eliminating people who you've been in proximity to for decades, if not centuries, right? Like what you have in America right now is the utilization of racism as a political mechanism by which white people can explain the falling of an empire. So we see that America's power internationally and domestically is falling. That America's higher education sector is probably among the worst in the world in terms of freedom of speech and academic freedom. So how do you explain that? Well, you explain it by saying there's been too much woke left rhetoric. You explain it by saying that black people have destroyed society. You say that the rule of law, that Western civilization, that democratic norms and values require strong Christianity, and that Christianity means that by God's will, we have to reinstate kind of a martial law of white supremacy in America. This is exactly what Hitler did. In fact, if you read, if this is what I always, this is why, people who discuss Nazism are interesting to me. If you read Mein Kampf, he has these dedications to the philosophy of a guy named Houston Chamberlain. And Chamberlain was a British thinker, but he was a philosopher that really supported kind of German idealism, right? He was a Germophile. And what's fascinating about that is that he had this notion of loyalty and reclaiming civilization. And he was inspirational to Hitler because Hitler talks about him as someone who understood the purpose of Nazism, which was this ability to give purpose to individuals that have lost faith in their own cultural ideal. Now think about that in relationship to Trump. Trump is arguing that the failure of America, the rise of crime, the inability of America to produce for its own people is not simply based on a material history. It's not that we're not educated. It's not that our industries can't produce or anything like that. It's the lack of vision. He believes that he is imbuing the nation with purpose. And in order to do that, you need strong white men that lead American institutions, and you need strong white women who are going to be incentivized to produce more white men. And this comes through in all their talks. It comes through in their anti-immigration and xenophobic language. It comes through in their arguments about criminality, right? You need to get rid of the Latino population because they're populating too fast. You need to get rid of the black population because they're too dangerous. You have to get rid of the Muslim population because they're not Christian. And all of this clears the way, right? And this is why white liberals are fundamentally misguided and dishonest on this issue. This all paves the way for the white race to grow and thrive without the obstacles and the pollution of other racial ideas. So yes, this is exactly what we see in Mein Kampf. This is exactly what we see in people like Spengler or Houston Chamberlain, right? It's just that we don't usually read their philosophies. We just look at the political movements. They were interested in unity. They were interested in notions of loyalty to an idea, to a purpose, to a people. And this is what America is trying to institute, right? Or really reconstitute, because it's trying to get rid of everyone to unify the white race again. And see, the white liberal, again, this is why they're just so immensely problematic. The white liberal may disagree with this, but they benefit from it. The white liberal says, I hate Trump, but they get to apply for all the jobs as long as they don't say that they're liberals. They get to live in a world that looks largely like Europe, where racial minorities, diversity, ethnicity, etc., play no effect whatsoever in government or institutional decisions. They're only competing with other white people. And if they have children that tend to be more moderate or conservative, they get the full benefits of Trump's projects. And what do black people do? We can say there's a rise of fascism. It's not fascism if everybody believes it. It's not fascism if all white people benefit from it. It's not fascism in 20 years. It's societal order, stability, and freedom. You see, the problem is that we've been lured into the idea of making moral condemnations about groups of people based on a set of freedoms that black people never had. Black academics never had true academic freedom because if you speak too radical, if you don't stay in your place, you wouldn't get a job. This has been the censorship of black academics has been written about for decades, right? Going back even to the early 1900s. E. Franklin Frazier, when he wrote Race Prejudice, had to flee because he told the truth about racism, which ironically was about how racism was targeting black men for lynchings throughout America. So now white people feel that they can't say. White liberals feel they can't say what they want. Oh, this is a crisis in the values and the constitutional rights of America. It wasn't fascism when black people experienced it, but it's fascism when you experience it. So then what does that tell us? Well, that means that in 20 years, when white people have now become more moderate or more conservative overall because they have a fundamental belief in their racial interests against black and brown populations, well, then they won't see this as fascism at all. They'll see this as freedom and opportunity for their people. Fascism for white people is just a matter of perspective. For black people, it's been an enduring condition because we're not represented or we don't control American institutions. And that's the problem. The problem is we have failed to recognize that what we thought of as equality was nothing more than a facade. And we've demonized, this is the crazy part. We've demonized the black people that have told us that. And it's just, it isn't about me, but this is about people like Derek Bell. This is about people like Harold Cruz. This is about people like E. Franklin Frazier, right? The older Du Bois. This is why nobody reads the last 2 or 3 books of Du Bois. This is the last essay on blackism by Ralph Bunche. Black people, specifically black men, have said that what you think of as progress is illusory. That what you think of as democracy is simply the permission of a group of people to manage you and not kill you explicitly. And when they get that lust, this is what A.J. William Myers said in Destructive Impulses. When they get the lust to kill you, they'll do it in a group to release social pressures and still claim that it's on the basis of order and freedom. So every white person in the community of whiteness becomes deputized, and we see this with ICE now, right? Becomes deputized to protect the white Republican community. And what are we told to do? We do like Amanda Seals and debate black conservatives. That proves something. Black conservatives don't control any of the mechanisms of power in the society. What difference does it make if you win an argument against them? What difference does it make if you perform liberal woke radicality or black feminist politics or whatever you want to call it? It makes no difference because you have no power. And this is what Stokely Carmichael was talking about. He was interested in racism as an expression of power and policy. He wanted to understand how the wishes and aspirations of the white population became laws, policies, and statutes to rule black people. How their aspirations in their mind became reality. And now we talk about this as if, well, every white person can change. It doesn't matter if they're good white people. It doesn't matter if they're bad white people. What matters is that white people have the power to dictate the future and the condition of black people. They're the ones that determine what our lives are worth and what our deaths are going to represent. And in this era of Trump, where he's bringing the National Guard to all these black cities and controlling black populations under the rubric of decreasing crime, we need to worry about how our people survive under that kind of political threat.
I want to take a quick moment just to give a shout out to the sponsors of the show. Thank you everybody for coming through to listen. This series is sponsored by the African American Men's Historical Society. AMHIS is a Black American men's intellectual society focused on the preservation, history, and empowerment of Black men. Go to amhis.org to learn more and visit their Substack at amhis.substack.com. I want to turn the conversation back into the channel that we started with, because I think this is very important. If you look at the history of warfare, there are two ways that most governments conduct warfare. The first is the psychological process. The second is the physical process. And one of the most common ways to subdue a population is to first break down their will to fight The second is to get rid of the outgroup combat ready age males. We see that, like I said
Hmm.
earlier, happening in Palestine. We've seen this happen when Germany would, Nazi Germany would occupy countries during World War II. This is something that we see repeating over when we talk about genocide and when we talk about the removal of populations and the extermination of populations. The difference in Black America is that even when that was going on, there was an intellectual core in those countries that would recognize what was going on, whether it was Polish intellectuals who had to be eliminated by the Germans and the Soviets, whether it was Czechoslovak, whether it was Czech intellectuals, whether it was even French intellectuals who some went into the resistance to
Hmm.
take up arms. You touched on this during this conversation, but I'd love to get more explicit with you about this. What is it about Black intellectuals that's holding Black intellectuals black from recognizing this pattern in Black America with Black men?
I mean, I think it's the liberalism and the feminism, right? Black Americans, specifically Black academics, tend towards an integrationist and reformist position. So anytime you had African centered theorists, you had Black nationalists, and now you have Black male studies scholars pointing this out, there's a resistance to it because the cost of the analysis is far too great, right? I talk about this in chapter 3 of the book. Elaine Brown, a lot of people talk about Elaine Brown's book, The Taste of Power. They don't know she wrote a second book called The Condemnation of Little B. And in that book, she talks about how the new racism exists both with white supremacy and black bourgeois, middle class aspirant peoples, criminalizing poor black men by a white supremacist system. And she says that this operates both in terms of government and in terms of academia because they see a stake in demonizing poor black males and crime, right, as a way to separate themselves from it and participate in white institutions under the guise of progressive politics. So when you ask the question, why is that the case? Because that's the version of equality that was made available to black people after the civil rights movement. It wasn't equality for all people. It was equality for a certain sect of black people. And that sect was overwhelmingly educated within elite institutions, overwhelmingly liberal, and overwhelmingly feminist, which is why before you got Trump, version two, all the commentary that was on liberal channels or the leftist channels, I don't really think they're left, but not non-right channels like MSNBC, et cetera, were basically liberal feminists making arguments about the push for women's rights, about multiple identities, and it was a way for them to detract from the much needed analysis about blackness and racism. They're reformists, so that's what appealed to them. And that's why you don't get these arguments about black men being targeted. Listen, the arguments that black male studies scholars are making about black male targets are black men who are civilian age targeted by lethal extermination isn't new. We've known this is as a mechanism of history and low-level conflicts. Social dominance theory predicts this. The late Jim Sedanius wrote about this in 1999 as a subordinate male target hypothesis. Black nationalists talked about this. You found this in George Jackson's Soledad Brother, and you actually found there was an essay in Joyce Ladner's The Death of White Sociology that talks about the implicit nature of the black male target within black nationalism. So these are well established intellectual traditions that make these arguments. The problem is that we have a liberal gender politics that takes itself to be hegemonic and all knowing that refuses empirical and historical evidence for political expediency. If you're a feminist, if you're a sexual minority, you are allowed more opportunities to form coalitions with white liberals because white liberals are largely afraid of black men. And in doing so, you adopt a political language of identity that allows you to participate in those systems more easily. That's what we're dealing with. That doesn't mean that those groups of black people are less oppressed. It means that they create more distance between themselves and the violence that poor black people experience. So they're able to displace their oppression and put it on lower classes. And that's been the model of equality that's been embraced in the United States for the last several decades.
All right, I want to bring something in. In December 1951, an activist group named the Civil Rights Congress presented a paper to a meeting of the United Nations in Paris. The title of the paper was We Charge Genocide, and it accused the United States government of genocide based on the criteria laid down in the UN Genocide Convention that I mentioned at the top of the show. The document cited lynching in the United States, as well as legal discrimination, disenfranchisement of Black Americans, police brutality dating up to the present day at that time in 1951, systematic inequalities in health and quality of life. The document's central argument was that the United States government is both complicit in and responsible for a genocidal situation based on the UN's definition of genocide when it comes to Black Americans. And I'm going to ask this question again. Why haven't Black politicians and academics engaged with and explored the idea that Black men and boys in America may be subjected to genocidal politics when there's already a precedent laid out for them to follow that course?
Yeah, it doesn't benefit them, and it's not politically expedient, right? I mean, the research shows that political initiatives in America that do not center Black males tend to be more popular with white liberals. That's the reality of the situation. That's what we saw with BLM. So you're not going to get a centering of the deaths of poor working class Black men and boys as the basis of any political movement because it will sever ties with white liberals. And again, this is the version of equality that has become prominent in America over the last 20 or 30 years. People don't want to form coalitions with Black men. You notice that within all the coalitional arguments over the last decade or so, they all focus around the disidentification of maleness and Blackness. Blackness is just a modifier for other groups. So we can link up with trans groups, we can link up with queer groups, we can link up with female groups, as long as they have white representatives that dictate and control resources. You don't find that for Black men. There's no liberal white group that's going to finance solving the problems of Black males. And again, this is why I said we have to start thinking better about how the Black leadership class and the Black political class disassociates themselves from Black males who they consider to be a problem population. And that's the part that's not ringing through, right? There's so much resistance to doing anything to help Black men and boys in this country even stop their deaths because they are a dehumanized population. And what we see constantly under the Trump administration is the mobilization around draconian policies and militarized might against this group of people. So unless we're going to get new politicians, unless we're going to re-socialize community activists and groups, unless we're going to start pushing back against the disenfranchisement of Black locales that are going to start focusing on death and the ways that Black men and boys, criminality and danger have been utilized by white supremacists, then it's not going to end. These are these are not mistakes. That's what I'm trying to communicate. These are not mistakes. Black academics and Black politicians are not focusing on these group of people because white liberals have made it very clear that policies that empower Black men will appear to be nationalistic, and they will try to empower groups of people that have largely led mass movements against white liberal establishments and institutions. That's never going to fly. Black men are the least assimilated group into white institutions and society in America. The least. So you're not going to have those groups of people given any kind of positions or platforms to attack America because historically, from Martin Luther King to Malcolm X to the Deacons of Defense to the Black Panther Party to the Black Communist Movement in the 30s to Woodbey, et cetera, those are all Black men, right? And America remembers that. So we can talk about all this supposed radicality of every other group, right? We can live in la la land, but when wars are fought, they were fought on the lives and deaths of men. You know you've won a war because there's a mine, a field of slaughtered men, and that's what happened.
Real quick. Again, why haven't Black politicians engaged with and explored these ideas we've been talking about over the past hour or so?
Yeah, is because of self interest, right? If you side with Black men indicate that American society is still vehemently racist. They've been one of the least assimilated groups, and because they've been one of the least assimilated groups, that means they have much more pessimistic views about how Black people actually thrive within America. So, Black politicians, Black academics are going to choose political ideologies that allow them to interact with white coalitions and white liberals better. And remember, this was a problem in the civil rights movement as well, right? I mean, this is something that Michelle Wallace actually talks about in the Black Macho, which was that there was the physical attraction that white women had to Black men, but in terms of political coalitions, those two things couldn't align, right? I mean, this is exactly what Stokely is arguing about with Martin Luther King. So we have this real problem. Black intellectuals and politicians are pushing on their own self-interest because they're trying to build coalitions and really utilize the power and money of white liberals to get their agendas passed. It's not going to be an issue. Black men, Black boys are never going to be centered in a liberal democratic political platform. It has just historically rejected them.
All right. Got a couple more questions, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A real quick. So if you have questions for Dr. Curry, put your hand up so I can see you. I'm going to try to get you in as quick as we can. I'm just going to have maybe 2 or 3 people ask questions. So if you have questions about what we're talking about, now is the time to send your requests so we can run through it. While we're waiting for people to put their hands up, I want to ask you this. Do Black Americans need to shift how we view ourselves politically? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely need to shift how we view ourselves politically. We need to think more seriously and more carefully about who we form coalitions with. Um, I don't think coalitions are possible under a Trump administration. I don't think that we have white support, and we certainly don't have white liberal support because they're not going to risk their careers and livelihood to save Black people. So Black people are yet again starting at ground zero in many ways. We have to start thinking about how we're going to seize political power. We're going to have to see whether or not we can start controlling locales in southern states where we outnumber white people. Right? I mean, the whole configuration of how we have to think about politics and the accumulation of power has to change. And remember, and this is the other part that we haven't discussed. There are Black people who are not going to want to risk that. Just like there weren't Black people that wanted to join the civil rights movement because they thought it was dangerous. You're going to find the same thing here, right? So there's not going to be a solidified program that all Black people are going to endorse, be they on the right or on the left. And we have to start factoring that into our analysis. We have to start really, dealing with the fact that there are going to be some Black people that fundamentally believe either A, Trump is right, or B, there may be Black groups of Black people, be they women or other sexual minorities that don't want to form coalitions with Black men, and vice versa. We need to start dealing with these very real issues in our community so that we can understand what our political options are. We got to stop living in la la land where we just pray for hope and say that we can meet. There are fundamental differences in the political aspirations and the versions of society that different Black people want to realize. And some of those are incompatible. And we need to get that out in the open. And we need to form with people that agree with this and not people that are going to try to utilize or utilize the money and prestige of white people, be they on the right or left, to doom their own people. It's a tiring exercise that we keep doing to each other that I don't understand why.
All right. Now I'm going to open the floor for a brief Q&A. We got a couple people who I already know we're in the space, and I'm going to let them have the microphone. First, I'm going to go to Pedagogy in Black, Rennie Toure. Microphone is yours. What's your question for Doc Curry?
Yo, what's going on, y'all? In Robert Allen's text, one of the things he's very clear on is that black nationalism arises, particularly when crisis arises,
Mhm.
and this is due in part because assimilation is now known to be a delusion. So as crises form, black nationalism forms along with it.
Mhm.
Um, with that, I was thinking about 2017 and when you were attacked by the alt right. And in
Yes.
conjunction to that, you were put on a professor's watch list,
Mm-hmm.
specifically Charlie Kirk's site. You were one of the
Yep.
first professors that I witnessed that happen to. But at that time, there didn't seem to be a moving around, uh, watching out, or particularly looking at what was happening to you. I do know that there were academics who came out and did support you, but there was also this wave of academics who kind of ignored it because as long as it wasn't happening to them, it almost just wasn't happening. And it
Mm-hmm.
seemed to be something that foreshadowed what's happening now with so many academics, black academics specifically, being doxxed, so many black academics losing, and in some ways losing their professorships.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was kind of wondering with this question of like black nationalism and how it arises in moments of crisis. Do you predict, or do you see, because I know you touched on it a little bit, do you see this sort of forming of more unity now that we are in this precedent where Trump is sort of really going after these university professors, and if not Trump, his acolytes are going after them? And how would you say, how do you feel personally about that, on the one hand, about the fact that this happened to you? You were attacked by these group of people, uh, but many of them just kind of stood by because you critiqued feminism and they saw, that as par for the course. And now a lot of this is starting to happen to them.
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I'll start with the first question around, do I think it'll bring more unity? For some people, yes. I certainly think there's going to be an increase and a refocus on race and racism as the basis of the Black experience. Because the other identity intersections, if you want to call them, are not going to resonate with white liberals. So everybody's basically going to be stuck in the same position, just like Jim Crowism. Everybody's going to be defined by black, regardless of your education, class position, sexual orientation, religion, etc. So I think that that's going to happen, right? In terms of the academic policing and people losing jobs, like I mean, listen, I mean, there's an old podcast I did where I literally said, listen, these things don't get better, they get worse, right? And you're right. Like there were lots of black academics that supported me, both black men and women, you know. But then there were really hateful black academics who were liberals or feminists who didn't support me. Who were, I think one person actually said either on Twitter or sent me a message saying good riddance or whatnot, or, and, that's what I mean. Black people operate in a world where if you don't believe what the next person believes, then you're a bad person. And I've been very vocal about this. When you look at the Black Academy, we don't have an exchange of ideas, right? You basically have groups of people who say intersectionality's right, liberalism's right, etc. And these are the people who are largely employed and endorsed by white liberals. And if you deviate from those views, it's unacceptable. So we've never lived in a free exchange of ideas. So when you get people that say, well, look, he's a radical and he's a nationalist or he's supporting black men or what I mean, who knows the title they use, you're not going to get their large endorsement. And that's just how the Black Academy works. I mean, I've traveled all over the world now. I've presented through, practically every corner of the world besides Asia. And practically every other group of people still embrace public debates. I just came back from the How the Lights Get In festival and nobody agreed, but there were civil debates about disagreements. That is not the political culture that we have or the intellectual culture that we have in the United States. And how I feel about it personally, I mean, look, part of me, I mean, this is what's interesting. When I was attacked, there wasn't a large scale movement for professors because I was one of the first people to be attacked. I think at the time, because I was still younger and I had just been promoted to full, I was worried about my career, like I think anyone would be. But one of the effects of that attack was it let me know how well regarded I was outside the United States. Like the year that I left, I had like 7 or 8 on campuses, and I got the University of Edinburgh offered me the position first. So for me, it was a question of, do I go and speak to this new international audience who seems to really value what I have to say and is giving me a platform to do so? Or do I keep negotiating with white liberals, black liberal feminists, and progressives who don't really like critical race theory, like the real lessons of critical race theory, and the kind of political pessimism that I write about? We chose to go towards the international route, and yeah. I mean, how do I feel? Part of me feels like I told you so, but it's tragic, right? It's tragic because you have groups of black academics who refuse to do real analysis and they're guided by ideology. And when that ideology fails, all their only response is to attack more black people. And that's one of my criticisms of the academy, of Black Academy. Very few black academics attack white people, right? Very few. You don't see black academics calling out the names of white racists in fields, or even now under Trump, you don't see black people really posting that much about Trump or writing about him. So we have this culture that says, well, we'll make criticisms usually against each other, but not white people, because we depend on white people for our careers, for their approval, to get into departments. And that's just not a culture that I wanted to embrace. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of repression. There's going to be a lot of black people that lose their jobs or don't get hired under Trump's regime and possibly the one after it. But that's the price that we pay. I mean, if we want to stay in America, if we want to push a kind of professionalism that depends on white acceptance, that's the price for admission. We have to decide whether or not if we're willing to pay the cost of it or deal with the cost of it.
All right, thank you for your question. Let's go to 8BZ, philosopher King Myron. What's good, brother? What's your question?
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir, loud and clear.
Okay. I just wanted to ask more of a general question of Dr. Curry's perception. So, being that the topic is gender genocide, and there's one major author in the history of counterinsurgency named David Galula, and he talks about victory in a counterinsurgency being the masses of a population of the target group to convince them as a mass that their male class that's posing a threat to white institutions is basically disposable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've heard you make this argument about the black academic class functioning in this way. But I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to know if you see that in general, like cultural commentary or even other non-academic type of writing or cultural expression. And what do you think the consequences of that is for us in this time when, male criminality is being used as a justification for occupying black areas in the United States with the military?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think it cuts across boards. I mean, there's such a close link between academic work and social policy, right? So even you've heard me lecture on and on about subcultural violence theory, but I mean, you had those debates among academics, and then Lynn Curtis put that into practice. I think it's the same thing, right? If you convince a group of people that their population or the men of their population are devious, criminal, or with a compensatory masculinity, they're weak and they're going to use violence to harm others, then you're going to buy into the justifications for disposing of them. And this is what really upsets me. Like, when it seems no matter how many articles I write or other black male study scholars write about this issue and about the historic participation in gender theory or feminism in this issue, which is the manufactured consent around the pathology of black men, right? Because if you buy into compensatory masculinity, you think black men use violence to reclaim manhood. So you think they harm women, they harm children, they harm sexual minorities in their own communities to build up manhood. This is a really decadent white theory, and we've shown that time and time again. They don't want to address it, right? So you don't that's what I'm saying, that the intellectual culture that we have here in the United States does not permit black people to be free thinkers. So you can't identify a problem with a movement and say, let's discuss that problem and deal with it. Because if you say, here's the problem with an idea like black feminism theory of compensatory masculinity, then you're said that you're immoral. So what ends up happening is you're identifying a phenomena You're identifying for how certain political or intellectual discourses, you know, are complicit in or perpetuate the phenomenon of making black men disposable. And then when you point that out, you're the one that said you're the bad person for showing how these movements or these discourses operate, right? So yeah, I think it's all connected. I don't think it's just academic. I think it goes down to the level of policy, but there's tons of different actors. I mean, I think that this is something that's spread through pop culture, is spread through news, is an indoctrination of the public at large, including black people, uh, that would believe that black men and boys are dangerous and they have to be eliminated or confined for the betterment of everybody. And unfortunately, until we get to the point where we believe in all black humanity, we're not going to be able to solve this problem. So I think that the future, it's a very dim future in the sense that there will be lots of casualties and there will be many more black people, especially black men that suffer before we can jettison this idea because so many people have built political and academic careers around it.
All right, Myron, thank you so much for your question. Um, let's go to Dr. Tony Gaskew, full professor of criminal justice at the University of Pittsburgh. Always a welcome guest on my spaces and on my shows. Um, Tony, welcome. And what's your question for Dr. Kerr? I know this is one of your fields.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's always great to talk to Tommy. Me and him shared some dialogues a few days ago, so I'm glad to see he's back in the States for a few days anyway. So, Tommy, here's my question.
Yes, sir.
As we both know, this past week, it's been amateur hour on social media. Speaking of Assata Shakur and the Black Liberation Army, most people have no idea the basis or context of the Black Liberation Army, but we both know for probably 15 years, if we want to say that they were completely neutralized, but they weren't. But for about 15 years, the Black Liberation Army continued to publish hundreds of articles basically stating that the Black American diaspora must arm itself. That at some point in time that white liberals would turn on them and the country would literally turn on the Black American diaspora. And we both know, again, Tommy, through CIA operations, Chaos, Merrimack Resistance, Cactus, where they were sharing information with the FBI, the Black Liberation Army, and of course, I never want to forget the impact that second wave feminism had on eliminating specifically Black armed resistance. Of course, the CIA options in and does a study on what would make a successful counterinsurgency operation in the U.S. And the first thing they came up with was pacification. And so my question is it too late for the Black American diaspora? And just to add in, as the 1973, there was a larger percentage of Black Americans that own guns than in 2025. If that's not one of the most incredible pieces of data that we never talk about.
Yeah.
So 50 years ago, a larger percentage of Black Americans owned guns to protect themselves than we do today. My question again is it too late for the Black American diaspora, or do we simply get what we deserve?
Wow, that's deep, Tony. I mean, look, for those of you who don't know, one of the arguments or one of the issues that I was attacked for by the alt-right is I said that black people have a constitutional right to defend themselves. Because I support the idea that black people should not be slaughtered in streets as if they're animals or vermin without resistance, right? So given that, you kind of know where I stand, Tony. I think that armed protection, armed self-defense. I wrote an article about preemptive self-defense following the work of Robert F. Williams. I think that's necessary, especially in these times where you have white citizens just shooting black people. Is it too late? I don't know. I'll be honest, I don't know. Like I see so much intracultural, intraracial violence of black people attacking each other. And this is even in a world where black people are told that as a group, they don't have any rights compared to white people anymore. And we still choose to attack each other. So I don't know. if Black people and the Black American diaspora will come together around racial oppression again. It seems likely, given how we know that nationalism and ethnic identity and racial ethnic identity operate, but who knows? I don't know if I want to say that Black Americans get what they deserve, because as frustrated as I am with my own people, I don't believe that the extermination of our people is is something that we can sit idly by and accept. Right? This is one of the reasons I'm not an Afro pessimist. I just fundamentally disagree with the notion that the status of Black people as slaves is a permanent and unchanging one. I believe that racism is permanent, but that doesn't mean that Black people can only relate to that permanence in one way. So I think we will have people that fight. I think we will have people, and I think this is important. We will have Black men that rise up yet again to defend their people. Whether or not we win that battle, I think that's a completely different question. So yeah, I wouldn't take the view that we get what we deserve, but I think that it's an uphill battle. And I think that because we have such a provincial attitude, what I mean by that is we see the Black American experience as cut off and separate from the lessons of history. We don't look at how other populations have been exterminated, managed, etc. So we refuse to learn and educate ourselves in new ways of thinking. And for me, having traveled and seen how various groups of Europeans hate each other, to see how the Irish hate the British, how various European groups hate each other within Europe, and how they try to build nations and community around that, we can learn from that. We can learn how to repair our people, but it's not going to come from imitating the identity politics of a white liberal, ruling class. It's going to come from us deciding how we define history. Like this is what happened with Charlie Kirk is a good example of this. Do you see how they used his death to create community? He's become a figure, a martyr, right? For white people, not only in the United States, but they had rallies for Charlie Kirk in London. And nobody even talked about Charlie Kirk. Like the whole focus was on Brexit and Johnson. Charlie Kirk was not a popular figure, but the image resonated with the white supremacists even across the Atlantic. Now you think about that. When we had all these Black men and boys being killed by cops that represented symbols of the oppression that our people have historically fought against, we had groups of Black liberals and Black feminists saying we shouldn't focus on them. You see, this is the difference. When white people die, it becomes a way to rewrite history. They use it to reinvent themselves and create more energy for their projects. When Black men and boys die, we disown them. We create reasons we shouldn't march for them. Hell, we'll go on white liberal stations and say, even though 97% of the Black people being shot by cops are men, we should focus on these other people, Black women or Black sexual minorities, because we said so. Because we don't think they're getting enough attention. You see, we'll fight amongst ourselves for the smallest ideas of white recognition, like death. But when white people die, they make everyone kneel to their martyrs. That's the problem. That's the difference between what symbols mean to an oppressed group versus a group that's trying to take power. Right? And I think we have to start reckoning with that. We can't remain a slave to the whim of other people's desires are for the eternity. Right? And that's why I think that in the wrong hands, these kind of political ideas like Afro pessimism or even liberalism and feminism, they lead us to dead ends. Right? The issue isn't a politics. The issue is a seed of analysis that provides different ways for us to approach a problem. Right? And I think that's what Derek Bell was trying to do. I think that's what Afrocentrists were trying to do. I think that's what Black nationalists were trying to do, which is why people like Sylvia Wynter said that it's from Black nationalism that we get the idea of a new human. right? That part is completely eliminated in people's attempts to reclaim and revitalize her work because they want to read her in an identity politics and feminism that she didn't claim herself. So what we need are systems and intellectual traditions that are generating new thought for us to imagine different ways to form community, for us to imagine different ways to build connections to other Black people throughout the world. And we're not going to get that if we stay beholden to white liberalism.
All right. We're going to start rounding it down, and every time we had these spaces, I want to close out with solutions. So, Dr. Curry, do you see any solutions or ways out of the things we've been talking about today?
Man, listen, I mean, it's like I said, I mean, we have a wave of violence coming towards us, right? So the first solution is how do we survive that, right? The first step towards the solution, how do we survive the incoming wave of criminalization, and the National Guard that's plaguing Black cities? Rights are not going to necessarily be the language that we have to use. We're going to, of course, need lawyers that are going to fight for our right to organize, our right to associate, our right to be free from this violence. But I don't think we're in a political climate where that's going to respond. So again, concrete organization, community formation, and discussions of armed self-defense are going to be the first concerns we have to worry about with National Guards coming into predominantly Black cities. And from that, hopefully other political commitments can grow. But I'm not optimistic about it. I certainly think it will happen, but I certainly can't trace the path right now of what that's going to look like.
All right. I think that's where we'll put a pin in it for tonight. I want to thank Professor Tommy J. Kerr for taking time out of his schedule, especially with the time difference and everything. I appreciate you coming through. Always excellent conversations when you come through. I want to thank all the people on the Q&A who came through to ask some very good and valid questions. And I also want to thank everybody who came through to listen, even through the technical difficulties. Like I said before, I haven't had.
Not right now, man. I mean, we're still trying to do some things with black male studies as an anthology. We're working on some projects looking at black male studies and the criminal justice system. There's a lots of projects that lots of different black male studies scholars are working on. So I think right now, black male studies is making an active contribution to pointing out these patterns of counterinsurgency, like Dr. Gilmore's doing, pointing out misandric aggression and just the conflict between populations, or racism is kind of a warlike state. And I think that, over the next 2 or 3 years, you'll see this, growing more and more on both sides of the Atlantic. But given what's facing Black Americans, my hope is that we can actually start getting real analysis out so that we can solve problems. I think that has to be the foremost point of where we are right now.
All right. So thank you for that. Again, thanks to everybody who came through to listen to part one of the conversation and now part two. This series is sponsored by the African American Men's Historical Society. Once again, the AMHIS is a Black American men's intellectual society focused on the preservation, history, and empowerment of Black men. Go to amhis.org to learn more and visit their Substack at amhis.substack.com. The replay will be up tonight. Also, if you want to hear the full conversation with timestamps and everything, it'll be up on YouTube. I want to try to get this out as soon as I can, probably Friday morning, and I'll send the links out over here so people can check it out. So again, thanks so much for your support. Thanks to everybody who came through to listen. This has been episode 4 of the Black Male Studies sessions, Gender Genocide. Y'all have a good evening. Enjoy the rest of your night. Y'all take care and be safe. Peace.